Great. Welcome, everyone. It is Friday, February 17th, and we're in the House Healthcare Committee. We're going to continue our discussion around what is in front of us as a committee bill, but it started as H230. And we will have Ledge Council with us at 11. Until then, what I'd like us to do is have committee discussions on each section. We're just going to work our way through. Recommendations on changes, anything, comments you want to make. And as I said, as I will say, so everyone who is watching us also knows, our intent is to take testimony today, on Tuesday, potentially on Wednesday, to have testimony and a vote. My goal is to vote this out next week. Make sure everyone's aware. All right, so the new version we have has findings. I'm going to skip that for right now. We'll have Eric walk us through that when he comes in. So let's go to page, the bottom of page 1, so really page 2, which is the secure firearm storage language. I know, yes.
I don't mean to be difficult, but sure. Usually when there's findings, they're followed by a statement of intent and purpose, and I don't see that. Is it later in the bill?
We actually did not do that.
So something to consider.
Okay, yeah, no.
Just, what is our intent with this? Like, I would suggest something like it is the intent of General Assembly to reduce death by suicide or something like that by something regarding lethal access to lethal means. But I don't know how to say it exactly, but you get the gist, something simple.
Love that.
Or list the 3 things.
I don't know if we have to in the intent, but I'm open to that. But I think saying something like it's the intent of the Vermont General Assembly to reduce death by suicide by
reducing access.
Maybe it's reducing access, to lethal means. And my only concern is that this is very focused on guns and not other lethal means. Yeah, so that's all. I don't know if there's a way to like consider how we address those other lethal means at some point, but that's my only concern.
Yes, and we will be, yes.
And I agree wholeheartedly, because we're healthcare, all of healthcare.
Yes.
All means of suicide.
Yes.
So I don't know if we're addressing that.
We will be. So you can find it on the House calendar today, and so it'll also be on our committee in there. So if you go to bills in and if you go to our committee page and go to the section bills in and out. 283 or is it 283?
I'm not sure.
Or 285, one of the two.
I think it's 83.
283 has just been introduced, and so that looks at other things related to suicide. And I know in some of I was just reading through some of the testimony we took last week again this morning, and poisoning is on the increase in Vermont. Yeah. And there is some governor's initiative around secure storage of pills. So I would love for us to take a look at that. So yes, there will be more, I promise. Okay, so I have the intent.
So
add.
I thought, Brian, it's a really great idea, and maybe just reduce access to firearm lethal means, and that would be it.
Right.
Yeah. Include firearm, and then you would also,
Maybe because I'm sorry, I just jumped in.
That's okay. Go ahead.
Because this
is a committee discussion, so I'm fine with just jumping in. Just don't talk over each other.
So I just to jump on or to sort of reflect off of what Leslie said, that the findings do focus on firearms, and so I'm writing down the words like to reduce death by suicide by reducing access to lethal means by firearms. Because I feel like that's actually like what this bill is doing. If it's an honest statement of intent of what it's doing, because the findings don't include any findings about poisoning or other
methods.
Yeah.
Got it. How does everyone feel about adding an intent? And
I definitely feel adding the intent is crucial. And although I'm kind of waffling on the specificity of means, because I think when we say reducing access to lethal means, that is exactly what we're doing. I think specifying the means is unnecessary. Because when we start splitting hairs like that, I think it begs a lot of questions. And I think by using the word reducing, I think that's enough. That's my opinion.
Okay, so we'll come back to that. Splitting hairs is a lot of what we do here. But I get your point,
In
yeah.
the world of suicide prevention, that term is significant. Reducing access to lethal means, it means a lot and it speaks to a huge community.
And we also need to make sure it speaks to this community, right? And people who will be voting on this bill, and then how it is interpreted within state statute. So we need to, so it's two communities we definitely need to be concerned with. So I take both your points. So we'll come back to that. I think we can get to agreement on that.
Yeah, under the findings, the second finding, does that include all methods of suicide?
Yes.
Which number?
2.
So that was from,
That is all methods.
okay, so we can change that to better reflect that.
On that note, I'm wondering if we can include a finding about what percent of suicides are by firearm. I don't know if I'm missing that. I'm looking, I don't see it.
We could add that to number 1. All deaths in Vermont involving firearms in 2021, 89% were by suicide and 8% were by homicide. And how would you say?
Of all suicides in Vermont, yeah.
Therefore, 52% of all suicides
Or by firearm, yeah,
were
something
by
like that.
firearm.
Yeah, something like that would be helpful, I think, to illustrate if we can get it.
Yeah, we have the data.
Okay.
I remember when we did 210, and that was Brian's bill, we actually included the citation so that if people wanted to look for it, it was listed in, there was a link, maybe not a link, but there was to the research. And that data came from RAND, the RAND testimony. So I don't know if that's helpful, but I think it might have value.
And just to, it's 2 and 3, but 3 was almost, I think, the intent to reflect upon number 2.
They do seem to kind of follow one after another.
Yeah.
Although these are really, all data is in stats is kind of a point in time, but these are all really point in time, as in like recent years. I wonder if it would make sense to do a range. Like over the last 20 years, 90% of deaths by suicide in Vermont have been due to self-inflicted gun wounds.
I think that's a terrific idea. I think this was just the data that I had available at the moment.
Yeah,
But
Caitlin might be able to help
Yeah.
us with
Yes.
range.
I think we have, we have
Yeah,
the
we have
data.
I think
Yeah.
I have it right here, actually.
So the RAND study also looked at that greater than 700 Vermonters died of gunshot wounds, 87% suicide, 17 more percent than died in car crash. So we have that range from 2011 to 2020.
Okay, so I do want to make sure we're not gonna, we don't want to make these totally expansive. What'd you say?
I said I don't want to piecemeal it now.
And so what I would suggest is if people have suggestions on the findings above what we've just discussed, please get with Alyssa and or me. And we'll make sure that we work with Eric to get those in with proper citations and.
I have a question on
Yeah.
this. Did you have to provide proof from some source for these findings?
So that's what Leslie was saying. So there are citations behind each of these. There are sources behind each of these. So we will add that too.
Okay, but did you have to provide it to Ledge Council for them to draw this up?
Did you provide it? No, but it's all been from testimony we've taken. Everything here is from testimony we've taken in this committee.
Okay.
Hold on.
Because I've been asked in another bill to have to provide proof of
Exactly.
my findings.
Yeah.
Yeah.
To make sure this is being done across the board.
Yes.
Exactly. I was just gonna say that Ledge Council won't put it in a bill if there isn't proof. So there has to be something on the.
That's fine.
Yes.
Yeah, that's been fairly.
Yes.
Yeah, they're very strict about it.
Yes.
So I can hand this over to you, Alyssa, or Caitlin's notes. 2021 Vermont saw a record rate in attempt and death. And then there was a range, suicide-related ED visits in Vermont are increasing over 6 years, highest in 2022.
Actually, why don't we do this? Representative Black won't have a lot of time this weekend. So why don't I take this on? So if you have things, because I want to be able to have a new version in front of us on Tuesday. So if you have suggestions, please get them to me over the weekend so I can get them to Eric first thing Tuesday morning. Monday is a holiday. Okay? That would be great.
And-
Is that
And to
okay
the,
for
yeah,
you?
and to the note about being too expansive, I would just say, if you have a suggestion of what was the one data point that you heard testimony and you thought, oh, I mean, the one thing that shocked you. I think that's
What we're trying to do.
what we're sort of trying to do is paint the reality that that the reality is different than the perception, and what was finding in all of the testimony we took that was most revealing to you of,
But why would we stay to only the information we learned from testimony?
Because we have to have it on the record.
Right, we have to have it on the
We
record.
have to have proof.
And I think we have a lot, including the range. I mean, I think
Yeah.
there's a lot that we
Like the
have from
materials
testimony.
that BDH and
Right.
Caitlin had in her
Right.
PowerPoints, I think Mari just
Yes,
sent. So if we could summarize, like, yeah.
yeah, I think we're all.
The other
yeah.
one-
We've got it, we've got it.
yeah,
The other, and I'll give this to you, the other two were over the past decade, firearm suicide rate of youth 20 and younger, 47% higher than the national average. And of suicide in Vermont, in that 18.8 deaths per 100,000, almost 60% by firearm, almost all were men and boys. I
Yes,
think that,
that's important.
I don't know if you can read my chicken scratch.
I'll call you if I can. Do you want this back?
Yeah, maybe if we could.
Can you take a picture and send it? Email?
and I think
Send it
that
to me.
that fact that you just threw out about 48% higher in young adults and youth,
Yeah.
I think it really plays in well and is very pertinent to particularly the safe storage.
Yeah, yeah. The impulsivity.
Yeah.
Or,
I just want to say something about the findings, not specific for the record, which is that it's important to me that I don't want to get carried away with findings, but it's important that we have a solid finding statement grounded in the testimony we heard and that we have an intent section, because there's many constituents I have that are uncomfortable with any kind of gun regulation. And in order for me to be able to support this, I need to be able to defend why I made the decision to support it. So where I'm coming from is like, I want to be really clear, like that there's like specific testimony and reasons and numbers that are behind my decision. So that's why I am kind of fixated on it a little bit.
Absolutely. We all should be, right?
Yeah,
I mean, that's why
absolutely.
we're making our decisions the way we make our decisions.
I never even thought about a statement of intent.
Yeah,
and
I didn't
love
either.
that.
Yeah.
I love it.
Okay, so let's go to secure storage. So I'm gonna walk through, but stop at any time. So the prohibition, and basically we're saying a person shall not store or keep a firearm within any premises that are not under that person's custody or control if the person knows or reasonably should know that a child, and a child is someone 17 and under, or a prohibited person is likely to gain access to that firearm. So I think those are the key points. So it has to be under your control if you know or have a reasonable, should know that someone under 17 or a prohibited person would be able to gain access to the firearm. If those two, if someone's over 18 and over, this doesn't apply, right? It's 17 and under and a prohibited person.
Okay,
What is the definition of a prohibited person?
It's Eric walked us through that yesterday. A prohibited person is anyone who is prohibited
From having.
from having a firearm. I mean, that's already
In a
in,
court of law, that would be challenged. Prohibited, does that mean, an elderly person?
No.
I think there's a definition.
There's a
there is a
definition.
definition.
We'll have Eric send everyone the definition.
It's on page 5 in
Okay.
the definitions, yeah.
Oh, is it right in the
Yep,
document?
that's right.
So if you look at row 18 and 19, prohibited person means a person who is prohibited from possessing a firearm by state or federal law or by court order.
Which means there could be many reasons.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, that's.
It's
Yeah.
essentially somebody that cannot pass a background check and has been flagged as a no.
Did you have a question?
Yeah. The piece, the phrase, within any premises. I don't know if it's possible in some places to secure a weapon, the way the bill would want you to secure it.
Like what type of
Yeah, what do you
places?
mean?
Well, further in here, it talks about in a case and in
Yeah.
a box.
Or if it's on your
Container.
If it's
custody,
on your custody.
if it's on your body.
Remember, there's an exception, there's exceptions, and one of the exceptions is, if it's within, Eric talked about basically
Wingspan, he said.
wingspan. If it's within your control,
So let's go to row 9 on page 2, the exceptions. The firearm is carried by or under the control of the owner or another lawfully authorized user. So that would be,
If I
you're
have it on me.
out, right, if you have it on you.
Yeah,
A child or prohibited person has access to the firearm as a result of an illegal entry into somewhere.
that's okay.
A child or prohibited person accesses and uses the firearm during the course of a lawful act of self-defense of themselves or someone else. So those would be the exceptions to that piece of it.
I thought of another exception that's not here. Maybe this is like nitpicking, but whatever, that's what this
The
part of
point
the
of the-
process is. It says if it's under, I guess it might be covered by number A, because it says if it's under the control, but like, what happens if someone grabs it from you? Like, that's not an illegal entry. It was under your control, but now it's not. And like, the third one says if a child or prohibited person accesses or uses it during the course of lawful act of self-defense or defense of another person. So I guess what I'm getting at is if somebody grabs the gun out of your hand and uses it, could someone say that it wasn't being safely stored because you let them get it out of your hands to shoot themselves? for
I
example?
don't think so because it was under your control.
But let's have Eric.
Yeah, this is the kind of thing, this is the kind of nitpicky stuff that I start wondering, like.
Yep, so let's have Eric answer that one.
That might be theft.
I was
Yeah.
gonna suggest something, well, yeah, like theft, or if you say illegal entry or unlawful seizure, or some term that catches.
Exactly, we might need to add another term.
Like a term that means you swiped it improperly. It wasn't illegal entry because if it was on your
Yeah.
pocket, but somebody pickpocketed you and took a gun out of it.
Can I go back up to the top to the first statement, the prohibition? Remember, it's that you must secure your firearm if you know or reasonably should know that somebody could gain access to it. If
Someone
you-
under the age of 17,
Yeah.
17 and under,
Yeah.
or a prohibited person.
So, I mean, that's the guiding principle. If you're holding your own firearm, you are reasonably assured that you are in control of that firearm. Whether or not somebody then is able to,
Grab it from
seize it from you, that you would not reasonably know that. Does that make sense?
Well, I was thinking of a particular story that actually happened a few years ago where a police officer was visiting a preschool and a 3-year-old grabbed the gun out of the holster. The cop's guard was down, not thinking he's in danger. And the 3-year-old picked up the gun. So it was like one of those situations where this is a police officer, they're trained with the firearms. and nothing happened, but it had that kid managed to make the gunfire.
Yeah.
You know, would it have been right to call that police officer liable?
Right.
But would that police officer have been under the knowledge that it was reasonably secure and a 3-year-old would not access it?
So this one needs to be flagged for Eric. So we'll bring this back up when Eric's in the room.
And judiciary might want to weigh on this part too. This is very
Right,
judiciary.
That is
like-
very judiciary. Exactly, right. Good point, Brian.
Knowing my children at 3 years old, I think it would be reasonable to expect that they would.
Yeah, I would never leave it like unlocked.
So we'll let Eric do
Yes.
this.
Yep.
Now, the part that I want to bring into this, because it's personal experiences that I've had. If I'm in the hunting camp, that's a premise.
Is it yours?
Well, it can be mine or it can be somebody else's.
Okay.
So you come in from hunting, put the gun on the rack, you unload it before you go in the building, put it on the rack. I suppose you could keep the clip in your pocket to try to keep it away from the thing.
But again,
I just want to make sure
Yeah.
that because I had personal experience with my kids when I took them to camp with me that would use my weapon. And I never told them they couldn't. What I told them is, if you want to use the rifle, just let me know.
right.
Now, there were times when my son walked in, I was sitting at the table with a bunch of other guys and he walked in and walked out. And he's out there, because other guys brought their kids too.
Right.
I
So-
mean, you
so
know,
can
and
we-
he came to camp before he was 12 years old, didn't do anything.
Right.
But once he was able and took the hunter safety course and all that stuff, my kids actually were in there and they were hunting with me.
So let's also,
So I just don't want to put somebody in a position like that,
so I appreciate that. So let's
Okay.
talk, let's look at the language around that. So
Okay.
again, it says, so in a person's custody or control, if someone's under 17, so in this case, you're talking about potentially a 12-year-old, right? But if you go down to line 19, the only way this becomes a chargeable offense is if a child or prohibited person gains access to the firearm and uses it in the commission of a crime. We're going to work on the chart, causes it to discharge section, or displays it in a threatening manner. Or row 2 on the next page, if a child or prohibited person gains access to the firearm and uses it to cause death or seriously bodily injury to any person. We're not saying that they can't have access to that gun, but if they get access because it wasn't secured and they use it in a commission of a crime, displays it threatening, or causes a death, that's when the negligence comes in.
So,
I know Art's been waiting. Art and then Alan.
Okay. So why are we instituting the prohibition? If all we care about is punishing, and I think kind of rightfully so, someone who does the penalty piece, make that the law. We're penalized, if you leave that gun unsecured and it's used in a crime, bang, bang, bang. We don't need to say you shall lock it up. We're doing that by penalizing the thing. Because I'll tell you right now, if you tell people to lock this stuff up, they're not gonna do it.
So,
Right
there's no
now,
way to.
so there's no way to know that. Sorry, go ahead.
there's a way to know it.
So there are statistics across the country on how and where people, not how, but the numbers of people who lock up their guns. Did you have a comment to his comment? I saw you wave your hand.
I think I basically just wanted to say that exactly what you're talking about
Is what we're.
is what we're doing.
Yeah, but you don't need to put the prohibition in. just penalize the.
But that's all we're penalizing.
Right. All we're penalizing for is if you don't secure it and someone uses it, if you haven't secured it appropriately and someone uses it
Right.
in these very, very small, they're not small because they could be deadly, but in these defined cases,
If you define what locking a gun up is, just define, this is what we mean when we say lock a gun up, and then say, if a child uses that firearm, this is the penalty because you didn't lock it up.
well, that's what this
That's
is.
what this
It's just has to be in this language because that's how the lawyers have to write it for statute. But that is exactly what we are saying. And we're also not expanding it to everyone. It is
I see.
children 17 and under and prohibited persons.
Right, but as soon as you say a person shall not store,
Well, that's because you have to set the precedent of what the expectation is that you must do. Now, if you choose not to do that,
right,
fine.
right,
However, if you choose not to do that and one of these things happens, there are consequences. But don't forget that later on in the next section,
no,
the most important piece about all of this is the information and the education
okay,
and the setting of the expectation that this is important that you do this.
okay,
So we're not penalizing you if you don't do it, but you're just gonna suffer consequences if something
something
bad
happens.
happens.
right, okay, all
It's
right,
like wearing a seatbelt, right? I mean, we can't pull over people for not wearing a
right,
seatbelt.
but they do seatbelt checks, they can come and check and see if you've got a seatbelt on.
But only if they pull you over for something else.
Right, well,
Now, in Maryland, I got 2 points because I wasn't wearing a seatbelt one time, because in Maryland, they couldn't pull you over specifically for that. But it's the same type of thing. It does save lives because people choose to wear seatbelts. Some don't,
no, I know,
you know, so, Alan and then Leslie.
One of the questions I had with the premises, and that's being so mentioned, the deer camp, the house. What if I go hunting with my son and some of his friends, and some are 18, some aren't? I want to stop to the store and get a hot dog. What is locked up there? Do I make them all get out so I can lock my gun in my car?
You're not on your on a premise.
Well,
You wouldn't want to leave I think this is a question for Eric. You would not want to leave the gun in the car with the children unless it's locked up. You could put it on you, right? Or
I could put it on me, then go into the store.
you could put it in your trunk
If I have to go into, well.
You put it in your trunk?
lock it up.
and lock the trunk and lock, you know.
I think that's where we get in trouble, demanding all this from the general public that's not used to my lifestyle.
Yeah, right.
So that's-
I get that. Again,
But
one of
again, you're
those
not-
children would have to take that gun and do one of these things, right? Commit a crime, display it threatening, cause it to discharge, which we're gonna work on, or cause death or
So-
seriously bodily injury.
When you say we're gonna work on, are we
We're-
just gonna take it out?
We're gonna
we're gonna
talk to
talk to
Eric
Eric.
about it.
Okay.
Leslie?
Well, I'm thinking about sort of a lot of the testimony that we heard, which was about impulsive acts. And that it takes 5 minutes, you know, for sometimes when someone is gonna get the idea in their head and then execute. And I'm thinking about your hunting camp and not your family necessarily, but what if, you know, and you have a bunch of teens there and, God forbid, you know, there's a bad breakup and there's a Facebook thing and all of a sudden someone freaks out and then has access to the gun. And I think that's what that's how I'm thinking about it. It's not common, I mean, and the idea is to protect the impulsive acts, even a deer camp. That could happen. So I guess that's how I'm thinking about it. And I know it's hard to imagine how to operationalize when you have your whole life operating in a certain pathway, but given the facts of the data and that there may be children around that you don't know well enough to, God forbid, you know, so that's how I'm thinking about it, is protecting the impulsive act.
Thanks, Leslie. All right, so in this section, we're gonna talk to Eric about premises, so if you stop for coffee. And we're gonna talk about unlawful seizure or something around A, and then causes it to discharge. Anything?
Are we now going, have we talked about A and B yet, Lori, or were we not on
We
that?
can talk about A and B.
Okay.
I'm just
What-
summarizing what we've done so far.
What if we, instead of saying separate from ammunition and be locked in a, we put or in there and said, you know, let's let someone separate the ammunition from the gun or lock the whole thing up.
With the ammunition in the gun.
No, well, it could be,
Yeah.
or not. If we put or in there, it would give somebody, like my situation right now, I have 3 rifles on a rack in my office. They've been there forever. We have kids, grandkids all over the place.
Are they loaded?
But no, the ammunition's down cellar, 2 stories down where I know where it is. There's no ammunition anywhere near those weapons.
Is it locked up, the
The
ammunition?
ammunition?
No, it's out, but I know where it is and they don't. So, I mean, I'm just giving a for instance, I can lock it, I mean, whatever. But I'm just saying, you've got the separation so the guns can't be used. Okay. You can, if we made it either or, I'm just saying it might be something to consider.
What if we got rid of the separate from ammunition?
Say that again?
What if we got rid of A? What if we just got rid of separate from the ammunition? What if we didn't even bring the conversation of ammunition into it?
And just,
So that means if you're,
So if you have a trigger lock, you can keep it loaded.
yeah, but.
Depends on the model.
But, yeah.
right, it depends on the model. I mean,
Yeah, I mean, it's all.
or you would have to lock it in a tamper resistant
Yeah,
place if you can't do a trigger lock.
I guess I would use I'd keep it in there, but I'd say, we suggest and recommend that your ammunition is stored in a separate place, locked up.
So
We demand it, or we can, I suggest that you wear your seatbelt, it saves lives. I recommend that you wear your seatbelt,
So I appreciate that, Alan, but in the language for intent, for legislative language, so the language would be shall or may. Shall is you're
I
required to, may is you're not.
I agree with it, but I understand.
Right, and I will say I'm not
Yep.
willing
Okay,
to
that's
change
fine.
it to may.
Okay,
I'm sorry, I can't
no,
do
that's
that
fine,
one.
no, I understand.
I appreciate that suggestion though.
and I'm not willing to change it to just or. I mean, because
Someone
in
could
a
get
separate
the-
location, if you keep your ammunition in one drawer and you keep
You have to.
firearm in
Separate.
another
You
drawer,
have to define it.
well, that's what I'm saying is separate can be,
Okay.
I mean, I would be willing frankly, I'd be willing to remove the ammunition piece as the most important part is that the firearm is locked and secure.
Which could also, I just want to understand that, Alyssa. So if you read B, it would, so it's in a locked container or equipped with a temper-resistant mechanical lock or other safety device properly engaged so as to render the firearm inoperable by any person other than the owner or authorized user. So I have to admit, when I first read this, to me, it was in a locked container and the tamper-resistant mechanical lock was part of the locked container. But what you're saying is equipped with a tamper-resistant mechanical lock is something on the firearm
Yes.
itself.
Yeah. it's a-
That would
trigger
make
lock.
it not operable.
Yes.
I think before removing A, I would want to hear what impact that would have on the ability to slow down someone who had an impulse to take their life.
Well, they can't fire the gun.
But I mean, the data like that we saw in testimony about having it separate. There's a reason that
Yeah.
that is a best practice, and I'd want to know what impact that had.
But I'm also very cognizant of of personal defense and how, that is concerning to a lot of people. And if you are keeping your firearm loaded, but still putting a mechanism on that, they can easily, they have biometric trigger locks now where they're only operable by the person whose, fingerprint it is. So if you're required to store your ammunition separate and also lock up, I can see how that might be to some people disconcerting
That they can't.
that they can't.
So why don't we get?
And yes, I know I know exactly, Daisy, the evidence that you're pointing to, because
Yeah.
is there some,
It's another
it's
step.
another step. It is absolutely another
And I
step.
heard Rob loud and clear, and I really respect that. And
So let's, every town's coming in, I will reach out to them today to see if
Perfect.
they have any, data on that. But I think it is an option to take out the ammunition piece of it, to have, it's all loaded and locked up or trigger lock on it so it can't be used. I don't know, what are other people thinking?
Mine does not have a trigger lock on it. It's in a metal case. It's in the bottom drawer next to my bed. The clip is in, but there's nothing in the chamber. And the way I have to cock the gun. So it's
And it's in a metal locked
a
container.
metal lock
So
container.
you would be fine, that would apply to you
Because the ammunition
if we
is there.
take the ammunition piece
If we
out.
take the ammunition
Yeah,
piece out.
the
that would probably-
ammunition, because the gun's no good to me without the ammunition. And I don't want to be running around trying to find out where I locked the ammunition up in the gun safe. It's in that box. Boom, it'll open, or I press 3 numbers. Either one, I can open it.
Yeah.
Okay.
I have a key also that is not in the drawer, but I know where that key is. It's right around the back of the fireplace.
Okay. Sorry.
Taking notes for.
If you haven't moved that tonight.
Yeah, go move that.
I'll have to change the location.
Can you tell us the 3 numbers too?
Just told everybody in the world.
The whole world knows now.
Or what are the passwords to your computer?
I gotta tell you.
Mari and then Alan.
I just
Oh, you're
want,
good. I thought you raised your
also
hand.
want to clarify that there's a difference between trigger lock and a cable lock. A cable lock goes into the barrel of the gun, not the trigger piece. And so you have, at least as far as I'm aware, the gun has to be, have no, you can't put the cable lock in unless, I'm forgetting the word.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
Action.
The action is open, there's no bullet in it, and
And so I think what I would like to do is stay away from the language of a trigger lock or a cable lock and just use to render the firearm inoperable, because technology always changes, right? And so we don't want to list 2 things and then
I
have
think
to come back in.
I think the language is clear
The
enough,
language is.
Yeah.
the way that it's written.
Okay. So any other thoughts on, we're going to hopefully get some statistics, but any other thoughts on taking out A completely? That,
I wouldn't.
You haven't sold me on this, Bill, but I would not take that out.
No, I wouldn't take that out at all.
interesting.
Interesting.
Okay,
Well, I'm all about safety.
okay.
I've taught it for 39 years.
Right, but so how does that, so keeping ammunition in and separate ammunition, right? So that we just listened to what Topper does. So he would have to change his process in order to abide if this passes. But yet he's the only one who can gain access to that firearm.
Everybody on you.
Well, now everyone on YouTube can as well, but
Unless they know the,
But
unless they know the
there's three ways to
combination.
get in.
but I'm not looking out for just Topper.
Right, now I know.
You teach, you store your ammunition and your firearm in separate areas locked. Now, I taught that for more than 39 years.
Yeah.
Okay, but did I live by that? I took on the responsibility that I did what I thought was right for me. Was it always right? Probably not.
Right,
But if something happens, I'll suffer the consequences. Whether I go to jail, but it's like making the decision whether you wear your seatbelt or
right,
not.
absolutely.
And everybody should be held accountable. But the thing I have trouble with this, I'm worried about saving every life, accidental lives, suicide lives, anything. And I just hate to just put it down in one bill, so, but I understand it.
Right.
I understand it.
Right.
So, yeah.
Well, so this will help save lives with that, where firearm was a method, whether or not it was suicide, accidental.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It will, and the persons that don't follow the rules should be held accountable.
Okay.
Just like every shooting we have in Burlington right now, everybody should be held accountable, but they're out in no time. That's not being responsible.
Right.
A death is a death.
So that is a conversation for our court system.
I know.
You are let out until your court date.
Right.
That is separate from this. Alyssa,
No, I just wanted to emphasize what you said regarding, again, the thing that I think is so important about this bill is actually the education piece. I mean, we use seatbelts kind of as a example. Think back 20 years ago and the number of people that wore a seatbelt. And think about where we are today. I mean, granted, there are still people who don't wear their seatbelt, but it's become the norm. And I think that the biggest piece of this is the education. And I actually had opportunity to take that hunter safety online thing this week. And the first thing they talk about in safety is store your ammunition and your firearms locked up. And in all the educational pieces of this, there is a huge emphasis on the importance of ammunition separate from, but both being locked up and secured. But I do, like I said, I do understand that there are a lot of people who personal safety is a concern and self-defense. And if you want to keep it in, I'm happy to keep it in. I'd love to keep it in. I
think that's part of the education part.
Yeah. And again, remember, there's only penalties when something bad happens.
okay, so anything else on this secure storage section? We have 3 things to talk to Eric about and potentially some testimony from Everytown.
Can you review the 3 things?
Sure. So we're going to talk about what premises means and Alan's example of, I'm out and I'm with hunting. We're on row 2 on page 2. It says within any premises.
Yes.
So there he is. I was just reviewing what we were going to talk to you
When
about.
I say premises, I don't mean just a car.
No, I know. Yep.
Okay, I mean premises,
Yep.
camp, house, friend's house.
Yep.
There's deer camps that no one
Eric, why don't you join us?
is 18 years old in the deer camp. There's deer camps in Vermont, but there's not an 18-year-old. There's high
Right.
school kids go to deer.
Oh, yeah. Oh, my husband went on the hunt
So,
just to drink,
well,
which is part of the problem. Bobby, you were going to say something?
Well, I wanted to be very clear what the word premise means, because there's a vehicle of premise. That's what, some vehicles like a
that was my
motorhome.
question.
A motorhome gets to the point of being like a house,
Right.
but it rolls, so.
Shooting ranges.
Right, so let's let Eric get settled for a moment.
The first was.
We're actually gonna do it now with Eric here, so we're gonna take them one by one. So Eric, we have just been having a committee discussion about secure firearms. We have some things we're gonna wanna do on findings, but we'll do that outside. I'll work with you, or Alyssa will work with you on that outside.
Okay.
And to add a intent piece as well. So let's start with, first, can you just state your name for the record?
Oh, sure.
Get that out and be.
Yes, Eric Fitzpatrick with the Office of Legislative Counsel, here to talk with the committee about the committee strikeout H230.
Great, thank you. So we have a couple questions. I am gonna state the question, and then the first one is really Alan's. So if I'm missing anything, let me know. But so when we talk about under A1, the prohibition, and we say within any premise, is there a definition of premise in any statute today? And the example that was given, and it was just one example. I'm out at deer camp, we're coming home from deer camp, I have kids in my car, I have guns in my car, but I stop to get a cup of coffee and I leave, can I leave the kids in the car with the gun, or what, like, how would that situation play out?
In other words, is a car premises? Is that
Yes.
kind of question? No. Premises generally understood as a building. It's a term used in the law that it could be, doesn't have to be a house. I heard you sort of mention camp, could be a camp, could be a business, could be a store, could be, but it's generally understood as a building, not a motor vehicle.
But what about a motor home? Like people camp for a long period of time and that's their home, but it's a vehicle too.
Right.
So if you're, or a van, even something, or there are people who live in their car. And
Yeah.
So
10?
a 10?
A 10?
Yeah,
I mean, yeah.
Interesting question. There's probably case law on that. I'm not going to pretend to know it off the top of my head, but I think it's a legitimate question. And so you may want to think about whether you want to define the term, or I could look into it a little bit, come back to you, whichever you
You
think.
could look into it a little bit and come back to us, that would be great.
Yeah.
All right, so then the next, when you're ready, Eric, just let me know.
Yep, go right ahead.
So
Thanks.
the next one is row 10 and 11 under the exception. So the firearm is carried by or under the control of the owner or another lawfully authorized user. What if you have it on you and someone grabs it from you?
So, at that point, in other words, is the question like, it's then used, right? Does that
It's
count
then
as it?
used
Right.
in a commission of a crime, displays in a threatening manner, in a death or seriously violent injury. How would that affect being held liable or negligent or whatever the right word is?
I would say that the firearm was being carried by you. In other words, it was under your control, it's sort of a separate issue. But if you're assuming it was on your person, then you never unlawfully stored it, contrary to what the requirements were, just because you were then subject to, an assault or a theft or whatever it may be. I don't see that as a violation because the exception completely would have applied as of that moment.
Bobby?
Well, I mean, it's one thing if somebody assaults you or hits you over the head and takes it, because that would be an illegal act. But what about if like a toddler that grabs it, innocently? Because that actually happened to a police officer in a preschool a couple years ago. It was on video. So I thought, what would happen if that kid had fired the gun? Would the officer be liable under this rule?
I'd say no, because the officer was carrying it when different if the child grabbed it from some other place in the house and it was sitting there. But if it was on the person, then you're clear of liability under this. If that's how you were carrying it, And in fact, I think that might be one of the sort of fact patterns in which the intent is to make sure that there's no liability. Because I think the idea is that if you want to carry it in your house, you can. And then you wouldn't be charged with any kind of safe storage violation.
Okay.
All right, so then the next one, which we talked a little bit about yesterday, is on the bottom of page 2, where we say, if a child or prohibited person gains access to the firearm and uses it in the commission of a crime, causes it to discharge or displays it in a threatening manner. There's concern around the language of causes it to discharge, if you remember from yesterday. So, thoughts on what does that really mean in this context? Or is there other ways to say it that's more explicit of the intent of that phrase?
I was listening to the discussion and my thought was that it's sort of I think a legitimate policy call as to whether you want to include that language at all. Because in some ways you're kind of getting at what you're trying to get at by saying they use it in the commission of a crime or displaying it in a threatening manner. Are you really even trying to cover an accidental, that may not be in this situation. The idea is that it's a heightened penalty, right? And you're trying to heighten the penalty based on some kind of criminal intent, not an inadvertent discharge.
Right.
So it's just a thought that might.
So
you saying remove it then?
So potentially we could remove it. That is a policy decision.
So we don't want to cover accidental injury, at least in this?
No, that would be the next section.
Okay.
Right.
This is just like a bad shot.
So the next prohibition is if a child or prohibited person gains access to the firearm and uses it to cause death or seriously bodily injury to any person.
Okay.
That's the thing we really worry about.
Right, exactly.
Not a gun.
Right.
Well, I'd actually like to talk about that.
About what?
Are we when we get to that next one?
Okay, so is everyone comfortable with taking out causes it to discharge?
If that's all that happens,
Okay,
it seems like it's worth penalizing.
okay, let's remove it. All right, Alyssa?
Serious. Line 3.
You want to take out serious?
What is serious bodily injury?
It'll take me a moment, but that is defined.
Oh,
Not in
feeling.
Not expecting you to see it here because it's not here. It's elsewhere in the criminal code. Probably take me a moment. So if you want to either.
All right, you look that up.
Yep.
All right, so, and that's actually as far as we've gotten in the last 45 minutes. All right, so then C, charging discretion. So this is around the state's attorney when deciding whether to file criminal charges. If a person who allegedly violates this section is a parent or guardian of a child who gains access to a firearm that is used in an unintentional or self-inflicted shooting that causes death or bodily injury to the child, the impact of the child's death or injury on the person who committed the alleged violation shall be considered by the state's attorney. I don't think anyone had questions on that yesterday.
It doesn't say serious bodily injury.
That's right.
It just says bodily injury.
All right, so are you ready on the serious part?
Yes.
Okay.
And the bodily injury.
Okay, great.
Both defined in the, fortunately for ease of reference, elsewhere in the criminal code. So bodily injury, physical pain, illness, or any impairment of physical condition. Serious bodily injury that creates any of the following: substantial risk of death, substantial loss or impairment of the function of any bodily member or organ, substantial impairment of health, or substantial disfigurement, or strangulation that was added separately for the basis of a particular case.
Okay.
Well, I actually I know a story about this happening. If somebody were to fire a gun right next to your ear as a way of punishing you, they wouldn't penetrate your body, but your ear would be damaged, maybe not permanently, but it would be a really horrible thing to do to somebody. And that, it would seem like they might be able to escape.
Permanent.
Yeah,
It could be permanent.
permanent hair loss.
We're gonna cover that.
So would that follow, fall under serious bodily injury
Yes.
or bodily injury?
I think so. Substantial loss or impairment of the function of any bodily member or organ, or substantial impairment of health.
But not permanent. It doesn't imply, it could be
Say
temporary.
permanent?
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
What about, I'm thinking about things like it grazes your arm and causes essentially like a laceration and I mean, that doesn't impair the use of your arm.
Probably not substantial either. I think that's
Substantially.
sounds like that probably would be bodily injury, but not serious bodily.
Yeah.
And so you brought this
I'm
up.
wondering, do we need the word
Well-
serious?
Oh, but what about emotional? If somebody wounds me with a gun in my arm, it's injury.
So to me, help me understand, Eric, if I'm saying this right, and that's a very good point. So bodily injury expands, serious bodily injury narrows, right?
Yep.
Okay.
Right.
Okay. So to Alan's, he gets grazed in the arm, he's fine, but now he has anxiety or something associated with that. Where would that fall?
Substantial impairment of health is included within the definition. So I think if it's substantial, then I think it would qualify.
Under,
Substantial impairment of health, that is part of one of the ways that serious bodily injury is defined.
and so if we only say bodily injury, does it also take into effect what's under serious?
It is more inclusive generally in terms of bodily injury, but I'm just I'm reading now specifically the emotional point. I think it would include any physical pain, any physical injury, yes. So in a physical sense, it would include anything that was also serious bodily injury. However, just by virtue of the way it's phrased, and it's a relatively old statute, whereas serious bodily injury expressly included a substantial impairment of health, which I think arguably includes emotional health.
Yes.
Bodily injury says, and it means physical pain, illness, or any impairment of physical condition. So that's more arguable to me as to whether that includes emotional injury or not.
So what
You
if,
could say both, but sorry, I didn't mean to
no,
interrupt.
that's okay, no, go ahead, please.
If your intent was to be broader, you could include both.
That's what I was just gonna ask. Brian, what were you gonna say?
Just that, although I'm not a fan of making more crimes, I feel like if we're updating what is a crime, we need to take into account the mind-body connection, and that to say like, oh, they were just grazed by a bullet isn't fair. Like, I feel like if you're harmed at all by someone's
Right.
firearm, you should be there. Like, there's no kind of harm that's acceptable to me from any kind of weapon or any, like whether it's like emotional or physical.
Yeah, can we include both? Like be incredibly comprehensive, and I agree with Brian that we need to expand this to the psychological trauma of witnessing violence.
Can we define bodily injury separately in this statute as it applies to the statute? I think I
So
learned
can
that
you-
with a different definition.
You wanna change the definition of bodily injury that's in?
That's in this, that will reside in this statute.
Sure, yep, you certainly can.
So we're not like changing everything, we're not going into.
But why do we need to do that? Can't we just do it by saying serious bodily injury or bodily injury?
Or injury without bodily? I mean, I don't know.
Well, because
Bodily or mental injury.
No, because serious bodily injury will encompass all of that. It says health, and we're trying to say health
Yeah.
is inclusive of all health.
Yeah.
okay,
Right.
so then you're saying, and then
Bodily injury in the definitions.
And then we can define, well, I'm concerned that it will not cover things like being grazed where you're fine. You don't have any mental health around that. If we keep it serious, it doesn't cover that.
But if we
However,
put
if we
both in-
define serious bodily injury in this particular statute, we can say serious bodily injury includes
Yes.
this,
We need
this,
that.
and both, mental and physical health.
So I want Eric's opinion on this, based on this conversation. If we just include serious bodily injury and bodily injury,
Right.
injury as defined in statute today, does it get to what we're trying to get to, which is pretty much if I get grazed by a bullet, then that is covered,
Yes, because bodily injury covers any physical pain.
right?
And if you had emotional repercussions as a result of being grazed by the bullet, then you would be covered by the impairment of health piece of serious.
Serious bodily injury.
So as long as, if you want to cover both, you should include both definitions, not just serious bodily injury.
And then we could also include those written out in the definitions piece
Sure.
instead of trying to create a new definition. That, my concern is creating a new definition of either of those when they're already in statute.
We could, another option is to cross-reference them. as well. You don't have to repeat all the language necessarily. You could just say, has the same definition as in, section 10.1 title.
Okay, Leslie and then Brian.
I'd like to see it defined in this bill because people are reading this bill. So that if you just refer to another statute, I think it's really hard to locate that sometimes. It's more steps. So my preference is if it's legit, that we include those definitions in our definitions so that we understand, so that our world understands what we're saying.
Could we include those two? Eric?
Yeah, either way's fine. Yep.
Okay, Brian?
So I've been on this committee, this is the 7th year, and we've never done a firearm bill
No, we have not.
before. And so the judiciary pieces feel like out of my league and I'm learning, but what does feel very clearly in my jurisdiction and my expertise is injury. And I feel like this is actually a very appropriate place for us to revisit the statutory definition of injury. So I just want to put that out there that like I'm not necessarily okay with saying, oh, the law already says this, we're just going to say it. I think if there's any time in history to look at what injury means, it's when a bill that would normally be in judiciary is in healthcare because and so just want to put it out there. And this idea of bodily injury, the fact that we are separating the body from the mind and the spirit, like I think most of my injuries are spiritual injuries at this point. They're moral injuries. Like they're not like there's a physical feeling and there's a mental feeling, but it's deeper than that. And so I don't know how many people here have ever been shot at, but like I'm still triggered. I mean, it's not your problem, but like I'm just saying, like I still have issues when there's loud explosions that I think someone's shooting at me again. So I don't.
Okay.
I just want to put it out there that even if people might say, "Oh, they just shot the gun at you, you're fine." A bullet almost hitting you does not mean you're fine.
And that's not at all what I am trying to say at all.
Yeah.
I'm trying to keep this simple, which probably shouldn't try to keep it simple. Art?
Yeah. With all the discussion I've heard here, I don't know that this bill belongs with us, quite frankly.
So
we are delving into things that are not our bailiwick.
which is why this is going to judiciary after us, but this is a health issue. Suicide
I
prevention
understand it
is a health.
We're into now the nuts and bolts of judicial type.
But
things.
as Brian just said, and I agree with Brian on this, defining injury in the context of health is what we do. And this is very different than anything we've done. I mean, we've never done anything like this, but it is clearly now, if we were going to change the fines, that's not our jurisdiction. That is judiciary.
Okay.
And I think that it's good that it's starting here because they can come in and clean up things that are judiciary related. But I actually feel like the health related things we should dig into, like injury, like us talking about what is injury is totally appropriate. Like, and like reflecting on that. And if it means updating the statute so that maybe this is the moment in Vermont history where the statute starts changing bodily injury to just injury, because we recognize that injury is greater than just the body. I don't know, just putting it out there,
It's a really great point, Brian.
And then judiciary can come in and say, well, this stuff here, though, you got wrong, and they could fix some of the other stuff, but maybe they would use a new definition of injury based on what came out of the healthcare committee.
All right, Bobby, and then I'm going to turn to Eric for some thoughts.
Well, before Brian mentioned that, I was going to say that getting shot at without actually getting hit by the bullet is a source of injury. If it's psychological purely, it's still injury, right?
Right.
So I was wondering, is there a definition in the statute for psychological injury, emotional injury? I mean, is that something even ever been defined? And I don't know if that's the way we go about it, but before Brian said it, I was going to say there's plenty of people who have PTSD and they never got hit by a
Right.
bullet.
Yeah, absolutely.
I don't think it's in the criminal code, but it might be elsewhere in statute. You folks might be more aware of that than I am, actually.
Yeah.
In more healthcare statutes, that sort of thing.
Maybe we need Katie and Jen to weigh in at some point, you know.
Let's flag it.
Right, so I want to flag it. Again, we need to flag it. Can you work with Jen and I will also let Jen know that we're looking to come up with a definition on this?
Right, a definition that is defining those similar terms. The only thing I would suggest is that whatever definitions you come up with, you use for this statute.
Yes.
That's what you're doing. anyway,
Yes,
right?
yes, just for the statute,
As
yes.
opposed to,
Try and change.
breach of the peace or whatever other sort of criminal
Right, right,
provisions might,
right.
because there's a lot that refer to the criminal definition.
Right,
Um,
but maybe this is a step forward to others
Yeah.
looking at it. So I think what we're saying, and correct me if I'm wrong, everyone who's engaged in this, is that we want injury to be defined as whole health in some way. I'm not saying that's the word, but so let's get with Jen
Right.
and see if there's something we can do.
Yeah, because I'm trying to think of language we use in other work we've done where we shifted away from mind and body distinction. And it's usually we say holistic, but I don't know what the right language would be. I think it does make sense to ask them and then they can be like, this is examples of what you've done.
Right.
Yeah, I think holistic and whole health and integrated mind body is what I've heard here recently. But even that, I think I have a lot of questions as a fairly new person to this setting.
Yeah.
So I think that'll be a fun discussion.
And some of it, and some of it is going to be driven by legislative council on,
Yeah.
you know. So anyway, Leslie?
In our committee definition, the word holistic is used.
Yes, it is used in the committee definition.
So that would be consistent. I'm just saying, thinking about consistency.
Yep, yep.
Our thinking.
All right, we'll get with Jen. Okay, I'm gonna skip the information distribution piece for now. Can we go to? Keep going. No, we're skipping it
Okay.
for now. We're skipping it for now.
Okay.
Okay, let's go. I wanna focus on the three and then come back to the information because we also asked Chris Bradley to help us with some language around that. Petition for extreme risk protection order. So this is the language. So I'm on page 6, row 14, section 5, 4053. So this is already in statute and we are expanding it to include family or household member. And we went through the definitions of family and household member yesterday. Does anyone have any concerns around that? Leslie?
So I talked about yesterday, your friend, and if we change definitions just for this bill, I'm sure that's legit, clearly. But if we're thinking about injury and looking at that definition just to be specific, I was wondering if the same might apply here. And if not, I get it.
I don't know how you would define friend, Eric. Is there a?
Yeah, I think that's tricky. I get it. But sometimes.
I mean, I might say,
You're in trouble.
I might say, so-and-so is my friend, and then they would say, well, no, you're not.
So therefore you can't take my gun away from me.
Right. I mean, I might think someone's a friend and they might say, well, no,
I get it.
I'm a friend.
I'll let it go.
But I get your point, Leslie, completely. Art?
Yeah, I wonder in this section what a person physically does, what you actually do. What would you do? Call 911 and say this person.
So what's the process for an extreme risk?
I'm just trying to think my way through how hard it would be for someone, because this is, at this point, the only part of this bill I agree with. I think this is good.
So I will let Eric answer, but I will also say, I sent everyone an email this morning that talked about our extreme risk protection orders in Vermont. It has a lot of data on it, so, but I will let Eric be able to, if you can answer the process.
Yeah, generally, it's, modeled on and would work similarly to the relief from abuse process. And the way it works is, if in that case, it's the victim in the RFA situation. In this case, say you fall under the definition of a household member, say it's your, someone who lives in your house who you're worried about.
Right.
That's the person. You would go into court, and the court, at least in the RFA process, knows that laypersons may come in for this. They know these particular types of proceedings will come in. They have forms for you to fill out, and you have to swear to an affidavit.
So this is
You
a
have to-
long process. This isn't something where you can call somebody in that day, the person can't.
No, you can.
Oh, really? Oh,
Absolutely. Yeah,
okay.
yeah, they're set up, the emergency piece of it
Okay.
is specifically set up for exactly that kind
okay.
of situation. So
Okay.
you have to have a form for you, and you
Yeah.
have to swear to it. It's an affidavit that
Okay.
has to accompany that, so
You
and so.
can make it pretty quickly.
Yes, yeah,
Okay.
they can issue the order right then.
Wonderful. Okay.
So just to clarify for me.
Yeah.
So I didn't hear what you said. So what Art's question is interesting to me. So do you call 911? Do you go to police station? Where do you're worried, and you need that? What do you do?
The way with the RFAs, and assume it would be some function similarly, the courts have designated somebody an intake person to take these emergency situations.
So how do I
RFAs.
contact that person? How do I know where to go? I wouldn't know that.
Right.
Because,
You would most likely call 911.
so that's what I'm saying. Is that the process?
Right, and
They
then,
would probably tell you. I don't know exactly how you get the right phone number at the court of the
But you
person
would
to
It's 911, that's
call,
fine. I just
but-
wanted to understand
I
what.
mean, if you feel someone is a danger to themselves or others, no matter what, call 911,
So this is just another example of that, and they would then.
right?
Okay, thank you.
We have, correct me if I'm wrong, we defined family, didn't we?
Yes.
Yes.
I thought we did.
It was,
There was a whole long list of
yes,
grandfathers and.
Yep.
yes, yeah. All right, everyone have anything else on that section? All right, so then we will go to, page 8, row 3, which is the waiting period. The person shall not transfer a firearm to another person until 72 hours after the completion of the background check required by law. Thoughts on this?
Okay, I'll say it.
Go for it.
Say it. I've been an honest citizen all my life. And which I'm going next Saturday night to a gun show, if I happen to win a gun, if I happen to, I should be able to take the federal firearms license, ATF, and get a background checked and take that weapon home. And I understand in different atmospheres, it's been done in a bad manner. So, but we are penalizing a lot of people, honest citizens in the state of Vermont for this.
So can I ask a question?
Yep.
You want to take it home to do, why? Why do you need it right then?
Mainly because if this is in Springfield, Vermont, which it isn't, but if it was, and I live in Enosburg, any waiting period I'd have to miss Tuesdays.
Well, you're not allowed to miss
Oh, okay.
testimony, so.
To go.
But
I'm an honest citizen.
Yeah, no, I get that. So we've done a little bit of research on what happens in other states. Would you like to hear what happens in other states?
I think I know, but you can tell them for the rest of the
Okay.
people.
So when-
Well, what do you,
Well,
no, because you probably know more than,
Well-
first of all, did you say win a gun?
yeah.
Oh, I didn't know that was a thing.
Oh, yeah.
Like,
This is how sportsmen.
I need to go to- I need
this
to
is
go.
how sportsmen make their money to.
yeah, so, well, how do you
But
think it
there's
goes?
different- There's different states that have a 10-day waiting period. There's some with a 7-day waiting period. Every state have their own, okay? And Vermont does have close, and I would think, maybe, I won't disagree with their findings, but I believe over 50% of the people in the state of Vermont have guns in their house or gun owners, and multiple guns.
Oh, yeah.
So it's just my own personal preference. I've never done anything wrong, and I can get penalized on this.
No, I was asking how do you think it?
So let's not ask that. So we did some research on Florida. So Florida has a 72-hour waiting period. And when you go to a gun show in Florida, because they do have them, and you do the background, you want to buy a gun, and you do the background check and you pass, then that firearm will be delivered to your local FFL. So you still have to wait, but it will. So in your situation, if it was in Springfield, it would be sent to the FFL dealer closest to where you live. So I completely understand that this is a really hard one for a lot of people, but there are states who have waiting periods who also still have gun shows. All right.
I just want to speak to, I know you to be an honest person too, and the people that we're talking about when we're talking about suicide are probably also honest people. So it's not, I think the majority of the times it's not about that. It's about, like Rob Black said, time, needing to add time
To a decision.
To a decision.
Other thoughts? Good conversation, Alan. Brian?
I would like to know a little more from you, like about how you mentioned something about a license. Is there some kind of document you have that you can get the gun at the gun show without the like longer background check or something?
No, any gun in the state of Vermont, you have to pass the
Background check.
the Federal Firearms ATF. And if I.
Is that a background check?
That's a government, US
Yeah.
government. If they have it on your computer, there's no flags, you could take that gun home that night. If there's any type of flag, and that's what I asked the other day about the flag or what, but I guess I was told it's a felon, but I think it could be other.
Oh, it can be other, for sure.
Yes.
Like
Could be-
in risk protection order?
Could be someone subject to one
Yeah.
of those, could be someone who's a fugitive from justice, could be someone who's been dishonorably discharged from the military. There's a list of federal categories. It's like 8 or 9
Yes, there
different
is.
things like that could flag you.
The reason I ask is because like, I could see the argument about why we would make everybody wait if someone already is a documented gun owner. Like if the government or whatever Big Brother knows that someone has guns already, why is it gonna matter if they get one more today? You know what I mean? That day, like if you have guns already, why does it matter if you get one more that day? You have them at home anyway.
Because I could have a felon between now and then.
Oh, okay. So that's one reason why maybe we want a waiting period or want some background check.
Can I
So
speak
wait,
to that?
So hold on, you can, but Art was first. Go ahead, Art.
Did I forget what I was going to Hold on. It was relatively, go to Lisa.
All right, Alyssa. Do you remember what you were gonna say?
Old age.
So I think Mr. Bradley actually was talking about this yesterday. So, you can't transfer ownership without going through a background check. But one thing that you can do is that you can give your guns, whatever, to a family member or a friend to store. I personally know of several people, because they tell me this all the time, who are holding firearms for a loved one because that loved one is going through like some sort of temporary crisis. And I will tell you from personal experience, my son, he owned other firearms. They were locked up and stored away where he could not gain access to them unless he was using them for the purpose for what they were intended for. That is why my son had to go and buy a gun, because he couldn't gain access to his own. Because frankly, he wasn't responsible to have an AK-47 shoved under his bed.
Yeah.
Yes. I know.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
what I'm saying is the argument of, because I hear this argument, if you already own a gun, why should you have to be subject to this? Because there are lots of people who own lots of guns that don't necessarily have possession of their guns. And those are actually some of the people we need to protect the most.
So this is helpful. I think it's important for the record for us to talk through this so that we can explain to people like why, because that does help give me more than one reason why waiting makes sense. Because it sounds like even if we had extreme risk protection order or like the red flag, that if that's in process or that hasn't gone through yet, someone could in 24 hours go get a gun and do something.
Yeah.
So,
But there are lots of people that would never use the extreme risk protection order or the red flag or anything because, they've already had conversations with their loved ones and they're like, hey, let me just do this. I mean, there's no need to involve anybody else in it.
yeah. Or their loved one has, I think we might hear from more loved ones at some point, but like I know some people who could tell you that the person said everything they needed to say to people. And the minute they had freedom, they went and got a gun. Mm-hmm. And so everything was locked up. Everything was under control. And that minute that they could, they went and got a gun and they did it. And it was within a short amount of time. So I get it,
Art.
Point.
Yes. We know how many people last year went out and bought a gun and killed themselves.
Versus they already owned one.
No, just how many
people died by?
How many died by gunfire from a gun they went out, purchased and shot themselves that day?
Personally,
I will tell you that is data that is not registered or that is data that is not flagged.
Okay, so we don't even know how many, and then we don't know how many, if they didn't buy the gun, wouldn't have committed suicide another way, because that happens. So
But we do
what are
know,
we talking about here?
we do know two people who went out and purchased a firearm
Yeah.
and died by suicide
Right.
on the same day because they were family members testified here.
Okay,
and I know one last year personally who I was hoping we could hear testimony on.
We do,
but we don't know that they wouldn't have done something else if they didn't buy that gun.
We don't, but the statistics are clear that if you use a firearm to commit suicide, you are likely to die and you do not get a second chance.
But you can hang yourself and die.
As well, but you're looking at a 90% versus
Yeah, okay.
4 or 5%.
That's what I
Okay.
remember.
Yeah.
But still, this is we're proposing to do something that has a big effect for something that we really is a fuzzy area.
Well, so hold on.
Can
I'm
I
sorry.
say
Yeah.
something?
Well,
what we do know is, remember that Caitlin Quinn that came in with that data? We do have an idea of how many people die by gun. And we know that Vermont historically has been higher than the national average.
Died by guns or died by guns they bought that day?
We don't know.
We don't know
what
that data.
They lost them because we don't collect that data.
Okay. So,
But we can ask them to start collecting the data.
well, maybe that's something we ought to do before we do any of this.
You want firearms dealers to collect people's individual.
Well,
data.
I think if the state collected some data and understood the problem, maybe that would be something that we should do before we enact laws that affect a lot of people.
so I think what we can say, and I will get this data for you, that where there are gun waiting periods, they have statistics that show the effects. Not in Vermont, but other places. So we will get that data for you.
And maybe there should be some findings connected to that.
Yeah.
Showing how in other jurisdictions, waiting periods have led to this reduction in fatality by firearms and suicide. Because that would inform our legislative intent we talked about why we're making this policy change.
There is a ton of data on that.
Yeah.
So Bobby?
Yeah, this is kind of why I don't want to go back to the beginning. We're talking about the findings, but this is why I wanted to include language that said that we're trying to reduce the access to lethal means. And there's a uniquely instantaneous and irreversible aspect to a firearm that is different from almost every other method. I mean, other than jumping in front of a truck, there are a few things that are comparable to a firearm. So that's why I thought it would be good to single out why we're focusing on.
So in the intent, you want to include firearm.
Well, I don't have to be these words, but the
The
instant
lethality of it.
and irreversible nature of a firearm death versus anything else.
I see what you're saying.
Because almost everything else, pills, rope,
It does.
they all have an out. There's a way that you could be saved. You could have your stomach pumped. You could be,
They're not-
they could intervene. Well,
Not immediate.
they're not instant and irreversible in a way that a gun is. Literally, a fraction of a second. You hang yourself, there's a few minutes where somebody could come and save you. That's an ocean of time compared to what a gun gives you.
Yeah.
But it sounds crude, and I don't want to be crude. It bothers me. But I'm not sure, it's my own opinion. When people make that decision to do suicide, gun is the actual one of choice because it's quick, it's fatal, and final.
And it's available,
Well, everything's available.
So
not necessarily.
People hang themselves are available. People use drugs, it's available.
So I'm going to answer that this way, Alan. But we know from data that if a firearm is used, you are likely to die. We also know from data that those who used other means and survived continue to live. They do not try it again. So our intent, my intent, is we need to reduce suicide in Vermont. It is much higher than the national average. And one of the ways of doing that is ensuring that people don't have access to a firearm where they're going to make a very impulsive decision. And in my personal opinion, waiting for a bit of time for everyone is a public health initiative. And that no one needs a firearm in a 5-minute transaction. You can't buy a car in 5 minutes. You can't.
This bill is a lot broader than just that.
It is a lot broader because we know that just having a waiting period will only reduce suicides a certain amount. Just having an expansion of ERPO will only reduce suicides a certain amount. Just having secure storage will only reduce it a certain amount. And so if we're going to take up legislation to reduce suicide, it is my intent as a chair to try to move forward a bill on the lethality of the method, of this particular method, to ensure that we are impacting the health of Vermonters as best we can, to the highest level we can. And I know I know there's struggle for people in this room on this, and I am sorry for that, but that's our role, and we will vote how we want to vote when the time comes.
I appreciate everything.
Yeah, and I appreciate the conversation completely, but I just want you to know why
Yes.
I feel we should put this in. I'm only one person on this committee. So, if we're going to take a vote, we're going to take a straw vote eventually, and we'll see where it all plays out.
Are we going to take a straw vote or a vote?
Well, we will do both, without a doubt. I mean, we will definitely take a vote, without a doubt. We may take a straw vote.
Okay.
To get out of committee, we're gonna have to take a
Yeah.
vote.
We have to take a vote to get it out of committee.
I just wanted to remind the committee of the testimony that we took. I believe it was Dr. Bell, Rebecca Bell, and I would ask that maybe people review that if they have questions about that the use of a firearm, all research has shown that it is the most impulsive by people who are least likely to want to die, that are using it as impulsive, and that people who use firearms actually suffer from less depression, anxiety than people who use other methods. I think that there is this, it's very important that we have accurate information. And in all of our minds, we think, oh, well, if you use a firearm, that must mean you really, really want to go, because that makes sense to us in our world. But I just want to remind people what the research has shown and the evidence that was presented to us by people who study this. And I just want to be clear on that.
Right, any other thoughts on the wait, we can come back, this is not your final say, but any other thoughts on the waiting period language?
Are you open to less than 72 hours?
What would you like to suggest?
24 hours.
How about 48?
I would be okay with 48.
Pardon me?
I would be okay with 48. If the whole committee, or most of the committee on board, I would be okay with 48, unless there's some research that we're shown that says, no, there's a huge difference between 72 and 48. But I feel like even 24 hours is better than 5 minutes. I mean, honestly,
So my thought, and go ahead.
I'm not okay with 24 hours.
I'm not
Alan,
either.
how about you?
Yeah, I'm torn. So
yeah.
I don't know. I really don't know. I do know that I've been getting emails, people listening and say, no, okay. But there again, they haven't heard all the testimony, they haven't done this, but my problem is it started way back in Vermont when the first gun bills came. We were told it's never gonna stop if you give in now. And that's so true. It doesn't stop. Every year there's something. And so that's probably why I'm negative. And I understand, you go get a gun, suicide that day,
Okay.
I can't imagine living with it, okay? But I also understand you give in right now, next year it'll be a different committee with more and more and more. Because most people, maybe not this group, most people, they want to get the guns out of hands of everyone. And I will tell them right now up front, you get the guns out of the crooks and the drug dealers and all them, I'll consider giving mine up.
So I understand that, and I'm just gonna say I was not in this seat, but I was in the building as legislator when Governor Scott and the legislative body passed the first significant legislation in a very long time. And I can tell you, the majority of the people did not want to take guns away from people. They want to prevent deaths. They don't want to take guns away from Vermonters. Now, I don't know what the next legislative body will be like, but I'm just saying from my experience at that point in time, which was the last major piece of legislation for guns and the first that had been here in a while.
Has there been a year that no gun bills have been presented?
Yes. Well, that's different.
Okay.
That's different
They've been submitted for a
than,
long time.
One person.
right.
I
But it
know.
takes a whole body
It's been a
and a
long
governor to pass it out.
Way
And then,
before they wouldn't submit it.
yeah,
They've been
that's
submitting them for
I know.
like 50 years, yeah.
so I wanted, can we stick on the question of the hours for the waiting period? Or are you going to something different?
I just wanted to respond to, in the people that I know and have talked about gun legislation with, I don't know anyone that wants to take guns away from everybody. I think that is a common fear of people who don't want any gun legislation, but I don't think that that's I don't think that that's actually true. There maybe there's.
There might be some. I mean, we can't say definitively,
There might be some,
but
but as far as a general,
I agree, but
I
it makes it
don't
tougher.
think that that's the case. I think that there are real problems in the culture today, which is different than the culture of Vermont 50 years ago, that we do have to address that do involve guns, but it doesn't mean that there's a large group of people that want to take guns away.
Getting away what we're trying to accomplish here. Does anybody know what an assault weapon is here?
Yeah.
What is,
So I'm sorry,
Understand.
we are short on time. That's a conversation we can absolutely have offline. I get where you're going, and that's a really good point, but we need to stay on focus, especially because we have Eric here with his time. So on the waiting period, thoughts of making it 48 hours. I will say my thought are on 24 is that, again, in the focus of suicide prevention, right? So 24 hours means someone might come home on a Friday from work and they're upset and they go to a dealer and they purchase a gun and they can pick it up Saturday night and they've talked to no one in that 24 hours. At least on a 48 hours, it gets you to Monday morning where you may then either have, gotten help, talk to someone, as someone says, just that time, right, to have a conversation with someone else. So that would be I'd be fine with going down to 48. I would be hard with 24.
It would seem that impulsivity, if we're talking impulse, wouldn't matter if it was 72 hours, 172 hours. If the impulse hits you, if it's truly impulsive, doesn't matter when it is, okay? I mean, you might get the gun in 72 hours and they call you when you're really having a bad time, you grab the gun and kill yourself.
Correct.
I don't think you can.
We're not saving every life.
I don't know what it accomplishes with impulsiveness because it can hit at any time.
It can, but it can hit at any time, and at the same time, if we give time,
I get it.
life might be saved. Daisy?
Yeah,
I'm sorry, Leslie, you were first. Thank you, Art. I appreciate that. Art, Leslie. And then
My
Daisy.
preference would be 72, but I understand the struggle, so I could live with 48. I think 24 isn't enough. I think Lori makes a good point. I like the idea of getting through the weekend, and which is why I like 72. Because then you get alcohol involved, et cetera. So if I had to, I would go along with 48.
Daisy.
We started at 72. Why did we start at 72?
Yeah, good question.
I think I can answer. Most states are 72.
I don't know, I could have started at 7 days, I could have started at 10.
You just picked a date.
I
So
think 72.
Alan says most states are
I think a lot of them are
72, so we can do
A lot of
some,
states
we
are-
can do some
yeah.
looking into it. It sounds like it's a best practice.
There is no, I will say that there is no research on time periods.
Okay, so
Yeah, I've heard
72
that in
is
testimony.
common, and I see that we're borrowing that from a common practice. Art's not comfortable with 72. Who else is not comfortable with 72?
I'm not-
Just out of curiosity,
I'm not
Yeah, I-
comfortable with any waiting period.
waiting period.
Daisy, I'm just.
Hold on, remember, we're not talking over people.
Yep.
But if there is gonna be a waiting period in here, I could live with 48.
Art,
Yeah,
and then we're gonna wrap it up.
no, that's fine. I just throw it out.
Okay.
I
No,
don't hear when we.
That's why we're here. So, okay, so I want to recap, especially with Eric. So we are going to, Eric, look at a definition for injury.
Yep.
And so I'll reach out to Jen as well and talk to her about it, but,
So for purposes of the next draft, say,
yes,
in other words, don't yet put in the existing, remember we looked at the existing injury from elsewhere in the criminal code. Before that, maybe ask Jen about,
Yes.
is there a more health law oriented definition?
that we could use, yes.
Okay.
So we'll do that.
Yep.
And then I will be gathering from people on the committee if they have any updates to the findings, and I have some language for intent that I'll send to you. I know we're off on Monday, but we are taking this up again on Tuesday at 1. So if I get it to you Monday, could you work on it Tuesday morning?
Yes, sooner the better. I'll be working this weekend.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
I didn't want to assume that you were going to be working this
Thank
weekend,
you.
so
Yeah.
I will get it.
This weekend.
I will get it to you tomorrow morning at the latest. So if anyone has updates to findings other than what we've talked about, please send them to me tonight or tomorrow morning. Or intent language, please send it to me tonight or tomorrow morning.
Took a note of that. I'll send
Yeah.
it to you.
Yeah. And then we're taking out causes it to discharge on page 2. We are looking at the injury. We are potentially changing 72 to 48 hours. We'll have more discussion on that. And then I know you wanted to make a comment on the language, which we don't have a lot of time for. So did you want to do that?
Last thing, sorry.
Yes.
Just so we don't lose, I think you also want me to look into the word premises.
Yes,
Is that
yes,
Last thing.
that would be great.
Yeah, exactly. Right.
Just regarding the language, the signage, I would be more than happy to take suggestions
Great.
on the size of signage, because that was kind of it was a lot of changing of font numbers.
Right. And hopefully, if they're willing, we'll have testimony on Tuesday that would also provide some. Okay.
Is VDH coming for testimony on?
No, they, not on
Yeah,
this, no,
Real thing.
unless we need them to. But let's talk about that also, because I want to let everyone go. Leslie?
So in terms of the signage, we did S22, which had signage that needed posting. And so I'm wondering if they're consistent formatting that is useful, expected, in order to be attention getting, to be realistic. If it's too small, no one's gonna read it. So there's a lot of words there. So I don't know if there are any standards, and that's my question of, from a public health point of view, what gets people's attention? Does VDH know that, or do you think?
Okay.
That's why I was asking about VDH. They do have standards.
So, yeah, I agree with you. I'd like to see VDH.
We make a decision about Spanish signage.
Oh, languages.
No, we did not.
We didn't talk about that today yet.
There's a big investment this year in the budget for language access programming.
Okay, so we'll come back to the language in depth when we have the testimony on Tuesday. We'll come back with a new draft for everyone to look at before Tuesday.
Okay. Are we gonna have more committee discussion on this?
Yes,
We are.
we are, but we will vote this out next week,
Okay, that's fine.
Thursday at the latest.
I have okay, I'll wait until then.
No, it's all right, go ahead.
I have something fundamentally to say about this entire bill, and I would ask the folks, hear it out for a second, and I'm glad Eric's here, maybe he can chime in.
And what I'm gonna say is we're gonna let Art do this, and then we are gonna think about what he's saying, because we don't have time for a rebuttal.
Real long and hard, please, no.
Rebuttal.
When
Not right now, we need to break.
alcohol in the state is legal. But we have laws, if you use alcohol and drive and cause injury, we have laws that take care of that. We fine people, we imprison people, we do things to people. We use alcohol, which we can have at our homes, you can have it unsecured, and you use it. But if you use it and cause this problem, we penalize you. Guns are legal in the state. But if you leave a gun untended and unsecured and it causes a problem, we should take care of that without requiring that you secure it. So I would just ask you consider the fact that if we designed a bill that just took care of the problem caused by an unsecured gun, we would accomplish what we want to without mandating you secure the gun. Just a thought.
I'm gonna break my own statement, but I'm gonna also say I'm the only one that could talk, and then we're gonna really break. I have never done that as chair, and that will be the last time I do that. But I get where you're.
Don't ever say that.
No, don't ever say I'm never gonna do that again. All right, that's true. Good point, Topper. Good point. My response to that, Art, is that in that scenario, which I understand the logic, we would be taking care of the problem, as you say, by charging the person for negligence or whatever the criminal act is. But we are not attempting to save a life in that case. By having a state law that says you must wear a seatbelt, we save lives. By saying if you're a gun owner, you must secure your gun, we are saving lives. if we simply say, if someone takes your gun and does something, we are going to charge you, we're not saving lives.
Okay.
So we can come back to that discussion.
Yes, that's a break
All right.
is in order.
Thank you, everyone. Sorry.